All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones, as you may have discovered. If you could rename yourself to include both your first name, your last name, and affiliation, that would be fantastic. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand button. You can find this at the bottom of your screen at the bottom bar. It may also be located under the reactions button or in the participants window, depending on which version of Zoom you have. If you're calling in by phone today, you can use *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourselves. And I neglected to mention that all people can freely mute and unmute themselves, but please try to be respectful of talking over people. If you have any technical issues, you can get in touch with me, either through the chat box at marcher@ctps.org or at 857-702-3708. Len, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Archer. I feel like an anchor here. So on today's show, we're going to have the 3C Documents Committee, followed by where we're talking about the universe of potential studies, and then we'll talk about Chapter 6, these assessments, the chair's report, and I think we have some minutes. But since we have, and it's probably a short meeting, so let's just do a quick round of introductions. I saw Franny there, so she's coming back in. So I will call out people from the participants list. So and I'll start with me. I'm Len Diggins from the Writer Oversight Committee, and next we'll go to Chris Porter.
Chris Porter, Massachusetts Bicycle Coalition.
And Ms. Osmond.
Franny Osmond. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to. Hold on. Eddie, I'll just say it quick. Franny Osmond from Acton.
That's very good. That's funny. And next we have Mr. Seward.
John Seward, Move Mass. Can never have too much Acton.
Oh wow, well, we're a clever bunch today, aren't we? So I have to step up my game. And I begin to have a real appreciation for pronouns because I don't know who J.R. Frey is.
J.R. Fry, town engineer for Hingham.
Great, thank you. And Ms. Fragosa.
Mute. Here, can you hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Anna Christina Fragoso from Boston Society of Civil Engineers.
Great. And Mr. Rieker.
Good afternoon, everybody. Andy Rieker from the City of Cambridge in the Community Development Department. I am a transit planner.
Great, thank you. And Mrs. Steinberg. And Barry's here only on phone, I think, so he may have some difficulties in talking. So if he is able to chime in, whenever he does, we'll listen to him. But right now we're just going to move on. I see Franny here twice. That might explain your feedback issues, Franny. So you might want to, if you can, break one of your connections, or maybe if necessary, we can break it. And Mr. Mosley.
Yes, Fred Mosley, representing the American Council of Engineering Companies, ACEC.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Mook.
Yeah, you guys. Hey there, this is Galen Mook, the Massachusetts Bicycle Coalition as well. I won't be on for very long with the flipping meeting. I just wanted to chime in the beginning and say hi.
All right, great, thanks. Thanks, Galen. Appreciate hearing you, having you here. And last but not least, Ms. Weiner.
Hi, Laura Weiner from the Watertown Planning Department.
All righty. I'm scrolling back up to make sure that no one else has come in since I started at the top of the list. Looks like we're all set. So we're just going to now dive into the agenda. And that's going to be a report from the 3C committee on the UPWP. We met yesterday and it was a fun meeting. So take it away, Chris.
Thanks, Len. I just had the live transcript playing and I had to turn it off. It was a little bit too amusing, but if anyone finds themselves getting bored, I recommend you turn that on.
Interesting. All right. Cool.
New feature for me. Yeah, so the 3C committee met yesterday and we went through the universe of UPWP projects, which I don't know, it would probably be helpful if people had it up in front of them. So I don't know if people have links that you've all can look at it at, or how if there's a screen share we can do, or how we want to manage that.
Well, I'm sure we can do a screen share, but it's really going to be in people's best interest to bring it up themselves. I mean, there's a link that was on the, excuse me, the calendar page. I mean,
There was, and Matt just shared it in the chat
yeah,
box again.
yeah. I think it'll be easier for you to see because you probably need to magnify parts of it to see it well. And while I'm talking, if you have questions, please use the raise hand feature, as Matt pointed out at the beginning of the meeting, because with the current view, I can't see everyone, but I can bring up participants and then see you when you raise your hand. So right now, I think we're small enough that if you want to jump in, you can jump in. But Chris, it's your show, so you tell me how you want to handle the Q&A from the members.
Okay, so what I was going to do is I was going to go through and just give a summary of how we felt about each of the proposed studies, and then open it up for questions and discussion. There is a survey that Sandy has circulated that I need to fill out on behalf of RTAC, I think by April 20th. So if people have follow-up comments, they want to email them to me by the end of the week, that's fine. But otherwise, I'm going off of our discussion yesterday and anything more that I hear today. So just a couple of overarching points that we were considering yesterday. One is that, with the COVID situation, sort of framing these studies in what's timely, what's relevant, and is there anything that, anything that should be put off because maybe it's a bad time for data collection. Conversely, how can we kind of, address the most relevant issues coming out of COVID? Another kind of framing issue was, studies that involve other agencies or would need to be implemented by other agencies, such as the TE or MassDOT. Just making sure that we have got buy-in and that this isn't something that they might be able to do through other channels, given our limited dollars available to the MPO. So with that said, we had a group of the first three studies being active transportation, developing a infrastructure bank to support tactical interventions, a healthy streets look back, and phase 2 of some Vision Zero work. So I think the committee thought that these were all potentially good projects. I think we were most favorable toward A2, which was the healthy streets look back, and good time to capture data information from communities that have been doing interventions, with healthy streets during the pandemic. So, see if we can get some lessons out of that. The infrastructure bank, A1, potentially a small dollar amount to scope it before, they'd look at the whole $100,000, which would be kind of expensive, but potentially move forward with that. I think the Vision Zero, we had some questions about any overlap between what the state's been doing with their state highway system plan, but we weren't opposed to that. Going into the land use studies, study number 1 was on a third phase of some trip generation study. I think our concern with that was, in the next year, can we realistically collect any trip generation data? When are we going to come out post-COVID to back to full operations? So maybe it's premature to go into trip generation again. L2 is follow up on some TDM programs, assistance to municipalities. That's just a small dollar amount to do some workshops. And so we thought that would have a good bang for the buck in terms of spreading knowledge on TDM programs. COVID, L3 was COVID recovery support. We thought that would be very timely, could be good leverage for local jurisdictions as they come out of COVID. And then L4 on the freight land use and mode shift, kind of, interesting topic, but some of us thought it was going to be hard to tackle and really hard to get any real mode shift potential, especially looking at these new kind of warehousing distribution uses like Amazon. So that might be on the theoretical side and maybe probably a low priority. Moving ahead into the M group of studies, M1, 2, and 3 are all kind of routinely programmed. So we started with M4, which was to look at warehousing logistics, local issues in the swap area. We liked it. We thought it was an applied take on the freight and land use problem. Consider how it can be expanded to other areas, but maybe a good case study. So we like that one. Congestion pricing. Some of us sort of felt like, it definitely needs to be coordinated with the state. And if the state's not interested in moving forward with it, and we're not quite sure what the MPO is going to add to that conversation. So maybe it's something that's better left to MassDOT. Future of the curb, phase 3, that's M6. Logical follow-on work to previous work, but maybe needs to be delayed given sort of all the uncertainties coming out of COVID. So maybe something we look at in the future. The M7, the Route 28 Blue Hills, nice idea, providing better access to the Blue Hills, but very localized. And maybe there are other ways of funding that. M8 work zone impacts. Some of us like that one. I think some of us had questions about whether that's something the MPO should be doing since the MPO doesn't operate work zones. There was a comment, maybe we can combine it with the R2, which is the network resiliency analysis, and since they both would involve modeling of network roadway interruptions. Going into the transit strategies, we had some, I'll start with the ones that we liked most were T3 on the microtransit tracking and integration, and T7 on the paratransit integration. We felt those were both very timely, potentially big bang for the buck in terms of helping improve service efficiency. We did feel like they needed to be coordinated with the MPO does some, it does a coordinated human services transportation study every 4 years. And so maybe that needs to be something that's just beefed up or whatever. The BRT opportunities, I think people were generally favorable toward moving BRT forward. I did have a question about overlap with the MassDOT bus network redesign study that's going on that I think will provide a lot of similar data. The bus electrification, another one that we like in concept, for the T, it really needs to be something the T owns, but maybe there's something that the MPO could be doing to help out the RTAs, statewide. Parking management, another question about should that be something the T looks at? Is the MPO doing something that really supports what the T wants to move forward with? And then the post-COVID fare policy may be something that could help out RTAs. So definitely timely, potentially some equity issues there, but we thought might be interesting. Let's see. We weren't real hot on T8 and T9. T8 is the MBTA construction cost comparison, kind of had questions about how that information was going to be used and what good it would do. And then the South Shore commuter rail capacity, again, a lot of questions about the future of commuter rail coming out of COVID, and is our capacity issues still going to be relevant in a few years? And then T10 shuttle route finance, that's potentially interesting and useful as well. So we had thought that might be a good one. Moving to the next category in equity, we definitely felt like overall there should be studies with an equity focus. We had some questions about these. The user cost could be useful, but we also thought about maybe expanding it to all costs, not just user costs. But I think the question is, is this something that the equity communities have requested, and would it be useful information? And then the measurement of inequities. We had some follow-up. I went back and I listened to the MPO meeting where they're introducing that. And the idea would be to set a baseline of transportation inequity so that we could compare impacts of the plan with the disadvantage, the DIDB policy that the MPO has been, and methods that the MPO has been developing. So that actually made a lot of sense to me. So I think that might be a real interesting study to move forward with. Finally, in the resiliency studies, the resilience program R1, I think we liked that concept in terms of assisting municipalities with resilience planning and issues. The network analysis, potentially like that as well in terms of identifying weak areas that if there's a failure due to climate effects or some other network interruption, taking that to a next stage of how to address and plan for that. I had a question about, is there some overlap with statewide vulnerability analysis that MassDOT is doing? So that is the whirlwind rundown of the case or the UPWP universe. So I'm happy to take comments if people like or don't would like to see prioritized particular studies or not, and then any questions, I guess, too.
So before Laura, I just wanted to say a couple of things. One is that Matt Archer created annotation of the UPWP meeting, and Matt, if you don't mind sending it to folks, I think that would be handy for them if they want to go and check what was actually said at the last UPWP.
I have already done that actually, but if someone here did not receive that, you can send me a message in the chat and I can email it to you right now.
Great, and that's it. I'll say another comment for later on. Laura.
Oops, thank you. And I did get that from you, Matt, this morning. That I didn't have time to look at it before, but I hope to get to it. What I would like to speak in favor of L1, the trip generation follow-up. I know you said that you thought this might not make sense to do during this post-COVID transitional time, but one thing that is still going strong is development proposals. And we must have like 8 lab buildings in one stage or another of development. And we are constantly arguing with them about parking and trying to get them to have less parking, because we know that more parking means more drivers. So what I would like to ask would be if that new funding could go towards research on, I guess employment density would be the word, for particularly lab and life science projects. And what I mean by that is how many people actually work in a lab building on average, or how many people could you expect to be working in a lab? There's very, very little information about that use. There's the general R&D in the ITE, but I think honestly that it's not, this is a new growing exponentially use in this area. And although I have tried to find information on like how much, like we're looking for something like on a per square foot basis so that we can figure out what is really the right parking requirement if we want to encourage non-driving commuting. And I think lab space is probably a little bit less COVID affected, because I think people have to be in the lab at least, well, certainly more time than if it was an office use, where there's a lot more office users that are going to be working from home for the foreseeable future. It's all tied up together because it's a lot of offices are talking, developers who had proposed office buildings are now proposing to convert those to labs because the lab market is burgeoning and the office market is not. And it's actually shrinking. So we're just, I think the information would be so useful, and it's not just for Watertown. I'm working with a group of TGM professionals in Cambridge, Somerville, Everett, and Boston, and we're all just at a loss for how to approach that.
I love that idea. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. And so next I have Mr. Rieker, Andy.
Yeah, so just to add to the support for L1, definitely in Cambridge, of course, we have Kendall Square and just the number of development proposals that I've been reviewing, despite the fact that one would expect, activity to decrease in kind of the conditions that we're in. It's definitely been like drinking from a fire hose. So I definitely think that the trip generation piece, and I think that TDM piece, that both L1 and L2 are pretty important, at least in Cambridge. And from what I've been reading in terms of just kind of the region's economy, I believe that both of those, both the trip generation and TDM measures are not just something that really impacts the inner core, but I think are having effects ripple out even into the kind of 128 corridor as well too. So I think it is something that continues to be important as well. So there's that one piece. And then I think I wanted to address the A2 project, which is the Healthy Streets Look Back. It's been maybe an initial kind of reaction. I was like, I don't know if that's super useful. Only in that Cambridge has had kind of a mixed result in terms of the healthy streets, or in our shared streets is what we called it in our program in the city. But even maybe that perhaps is a useful piece of information and teasing out the exact reasons why it was kind of a mixed experience. And I know a lot of transportation advocates in particular were really excited by the shared streets and healthy streets initiatives during, I think, really in the summertime last year. But in terms of a municipal operational perspective, it was really challenging. And so even just kind of explaining what the challenges are and maintaining those type of programs on a municipal level could be a useful and interesting piece of information for people who are considering these kind of temporary programs. So, that's just kind of an initial reaction that I had. I wasn't so sure if it was going to actually lead to more projects, to be honest, but it could just be an interesting, collection of experiences there.
That's interesting. I can't raise my hand, so I'm going to put myself in line after Anna Christina, who's going now. Melissa?
Yeah, just really quickly, when Laura was speaking, I just wanted to say back when I first graduated college, I did some work with parking garages. And I believe if you need to look up some information, the EPA sets a lot of standards about how much driving and pollution and parking spots a given facility, or not a facility, given city allows for. So you might want to look with the EPA. That's it.
That was faster than I thought it was being. And let me see if I can bring up session. There we go. So yeah, in response to Andy, I wanted to say, I think negative data is really valuable. So if these things didn't work out as well as people thought they would, or they didn't meet the objectives that people thought that they would, then it'd be good, one, to know that, but then two, to know why that was the case, to the extent we can figure that out. And also, you said it was kind of hard to get these things going. I mean, maybe that would fit in with that first study. I mean, I don't have the studies pulled up, but the one where the CTS is thinking about, or the appeal is thinking about creating like this little bank. And I think part of that bank would be to have some of the gear that people would need for these share street projects. First off, it'd be $100,000, proposed at $100,000. But when talking at the UPWP meeting, they said that the initial part of it would be to get a general assessment of the need. And I'm maybe not phrasing that correctly, but essentially they said the first phase of it would be about 20K. And so is that something you think would be worthwhile exploring, Andy? Or do you think the problem is beyond just having stuff that you need to do to share streets? So you have your hand up, just unmute yourself when you want to talk.
Yeah, so definitely there's a operational component that is beyond just the procurement of the equipment itself. So as an example, in Cambridge, the 3 shared streets that we operated were actually all around the city, intentionally, because we didn't want to put everything into like one neighborhood around the city. But what ended up happening is that it really stretched our staff resources thin in the regular or operations of the shared streets initiative. It was also compounded by the fact that we are in a pandemic still. And so, it did mean that we couldn't really mobilize operations in the way that we would maybe in a different situation. But nonetheless, it was a pretty significant strain on the relatively abundant resources that we have in Cambridge to be putting up cones, be resetting cones if things get knocked down, signage, in addition to the outreach that we are trying to do to make it as inclusive as possible. So there is a staff capacity question there that isn't necessarily going to be addressed if you're only creating an infrastructure bank. And, I think the look back could be helpful to elucidate that that's an important consideration. I think, like you said, to the negative feedback is also being instructive.
That's so interesting. Yeah, it makes me almost just want to talk more about that. Even if it isn't a study done, I mean, maybe you could talk with us about that, or if it's something you feel comfortable doing. And so I'm going to stop talking. I don't see any other questions, but I'm going to turn it back over to Chris. If he wants to say more.
Did have one more
Sure.
thing here.
Okay, sure.
So in terms of the equity piece, I just realized that was the other thing that I just wanted to encourage us to consider was, I think E2, the baseline, if I remember correctly, I think it's the second transportation equity study. I really am excited just by hearing those words of establishing the baseline. In my previous work in terms of equity in the region, that was one of the most difficult things, is that transportation analyses are required to look forward and not necessarily look back, and just understand the current situation that we're in even. So establishing a baseline and having something to compare it to, when you do look at those other analyses would be great. And I really think E2 seems like a very important thing from taking a look at transportation equity.
Well, so I didn't even have to invite Bessie Harvey to be here. I wanted to, but that only occurred to me yesterday. It was just too short notice. I didn't even want to put her in a position of having to say no to really short notice. But great, thank you. I said Bessie Harvey because she's the one that presented on that, and that's going to be our study. So I'll turn it back over to Chris.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Len. Yeah, just in terms of next steps, yeah, I mean, again, I'm going to fill out the survey based on kind of the priorities that we discussed yesterday and the additional feedback today. I think that has an opportunity to provide comments as well as just a ranking. And, everyone on the committee is welcome to, provide comments in the UPWP as members of the public when that comes around. But anyhow, yeah, I don't really have next steps beyond that. It's just, us getting all the feedback we've heard into Sandy.
Yeah, great. So go ahead. Yeah.
Can I just add something?
Sure.
This morning I was at a meeting with Sandy Johnston, who suggested that, is it a UPWP committee on May 6th, Matt? Do you know offhand?
I believe that is the next meeting, yes.
Yeah, he suggested if anyone felt strongly to either attend that meeting or to write a letter by then for that group. Is that what you're doing, Chris? Is your evaluation for that committee meeting? Your recommendation?
I think the survey that is being distributed will be input to that meeting.
Okay.
Last year, Matt Genova was nice enough to generate a survey for us that was a little bit different than the survey that Chris is going to fill out, so that all the members who wanted to for RTAC could fill it out as input for the 3C committee, but the timing just didn't allow for that this time. But I mean, if you care to rank them all, I'd be interested in seeing how you rank them and how I compare it to my ranking. I did an initial ranking, and then after the last UPWP meeting last week, and I certainly changed my mind on a lot of them. And this discussion has changed my mind again about some of them, and that's kind of the great part about having these discussions and getting input from people. So that's great. So okay, that's Chris's timeline, and I'll just add one piece of really good news that came out of yesterday's UPWP meeting was that Chris said that he would come back and lead the 3C committee again, even though he's going to retire. So he'll be like emeritus, and he's serious about that. And so
I didn't say I'd lead the committee. I said I would pop in for a visit when you discuss the UPWP.
Oh, you see. Well, that's okay. Good. We'll take anything. All right, fine. So that I really wasn't exaggerating. That's how I heard it in my mind. But maybe that was just me and wishful thinking. But hey, we'll take any amount of Chris Porter that we can get. Yeah, as I'm in the lab myself, and there's another meeting going on. I don't want to project my voice too much in that direction. So that's that. So that's 3C. And gonna move on, unless someone else has something they want to say about UPWP. Okay. So we're gonna talk about the needs assessment, but I'm gonna save that for last. We got the time this time, but it's really gonna depend on how many people really want to participate in that conversation. That will determine whether or not people just can leave if they want, and those of us who want to talk about it can continue talking about it for the rest of the meeting. So the chair's report, that is essentially it. Essentially, we decided that we weren't going to really adopt any new projects, for 2026 because of the financial situation. I guess something happened with GLX, so that I guess the feds gave us more money. Can you help me with this, Matt? We have more money for GLX, and so we're able to fund a bus project on, is it Columbus Ave? And it's a really cool bus project, So it's essentially a BRT, and so and we took that because there were no projects in the tip that were ready to start as soon as possible, being this next fiscal year, and it hasn't been scored, but it will be scored. And it'll be really interesting to see the score on that one because I think it'll come in with a really high score. So that's kind of like the tip update. Matt, you're going to help out?
No, you got that pretty much spot on. I was just going to say that if anyone is interested, I can send you a link to the tip discussion that happened at the last MPO meeting. It's slightly convoluted, and at least in my time working with the MPO, I haven't quite seen a financial situation like this before. So I think it's very interesting, but I do think that to Len's point, speaking personally, I'm excited that we are getting a very nice project out of it. Said there are not more though, but I say that personally.
Yeah. Well, what I was confused about or not remembering sufficiently was how we got the additional monies. I mean, I know it has to do with GLX, and I think the feds gave us more money on GLX. And so we could take the money that we had set aside or for GLX in this fiscal year and devoted to something else. It's really not clear if we're going to get more money in subsequent years for GLX, although I think people are a little hopeful that will be the case. So that's pretty much the chair's report on that. There is going to be a subcommittee and let me rephrase that, an ad hoc committee that will look into developing or changing our policies with respect to how we handle projects to see if we can avoid a situation like this. But I guess we have about $20 million. It's anywhere from $13 to $20 million for 2026 that we decided not to program because we just aren't sure what's going to happen in the years before that. And so given that there have been price cost increases that have led to the situation that we're currently in, then the assumption is that there will be more. So if our current policy is that we're going to stick with a project no matter what, then we shouldn't really program anything when there's a good probability that we're not going to have the money to support it in 2026. And then we're in a situation where we've told an entity that your program is planned for 2026. They start making plans for that, and then we get to 2026 and we don't have the money. Then we're like either have to tell them you have to wait, or we tell some other project that you have to wait. So that's the decision behind not funding anything in 2026. So again, that's pretty much the chair's report. And any questions? Andy?
So one question that I did have, not that I expect this to have any conversation in the MPO board meetings until something is passed in Congress, but I am thinking a little bit about the infrastructure plan that was proposed by President Biden and just what that means for an organization like the MPO. So more so just a request that when it does seem like something like that may happen, after maybe a law passes and some months are spent developing guidelines that get filtered down to the MPO, it would be good to understand what that actually means for MPO funding. I believe what I understand is that some of the projects that would be funded by an infrastructure plan would have to be involved in the TIP somehow. And the question that I have as a municipal official is the TIP in the MPO's world is severely constrained in the next few years. And how does the infrastructure plan then relate is really like what that means is like, does this free up some more funding in the coming years, and how does that change the mix? It seems like we may have more options to choose from and those kind of things, but just to maybe just make a request that as those conversations happen, if there is a way to get us in and aware of what the MPO board is thinking, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I hear you. That's good. And I see John Stewart.
Yes. So what I gather is that we can accelerate GLX phase 1 and complete it sooner. And that brings up the question of where is GLX phase 2? And can we get that going a bit sooner and otherwise make sure it doesn't slip off the table?
So you're saying that what you understand is going on with the MPO is that we are accelerating GLX?
That's what it sounded like to me.
From what I just said?
From what transpired at the MPO meeting.
Okay, because my understanding was that we weren't accelerating as much as it was, not as much as it was, that the feds gave us money that we weren't expecting them to give us. So it's not that things are going faster, it's more that there is an alternative funding source. And so the money that we get set aside through the MPO, we don't have to spend on it.
It sounded as if additional funds being supplied to the GLX project was what was being contemplated. And the MPO decided not to take up the shifting of equal amounts to other projects at this time. Okay. And the second part of my question, I think, is the more important one, which is we need to keep our eye on GLX phase 2 to make sure it happens at some hopefully early point in the near future.
I
Okay.
don't know what GLX2 is. Can you just say what phase 2
The
is?
continuation of the line to Medford, effectively.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that's nowhere on the tip, and so I think that would be something to push for in the next
I will
LRTP.
observe that I have been party to far more MBTA projects that get studied and planned and somehow never get constructed.
Mhm.
And I would hate to see that fate fall to the GLX.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I think that would be something to really push for in the next LRTP, and again, that's just 2 years away, and so I hear you, and
And
that's go ahead.
lastly, I'll note that, what was it, 2 years ago?
Mhm.
We made a decision with less than a month's notice to shift more than $100 million from phase 2 to phase 1, so that it would stay alive and continue in construction. So
Okay, I'm pausing because I'm just trying to remember, so we as in okay, yeah. So you're saying the MPO decided to shift $100 million to fund phase 1 of GLX?
that's correct.
Okay.
And
Right.
RTAC was party in agreement to that decision.
Okay. Right. So I believe you. Just not remembering the details of that coming up. So but I believe you. So all right, and that's what we ended up funding over X number of years, probably 4 years, right?
Yeah, I don't know
Okay.
how
All right.
the funds were structured.
Okay. All right.
It's a large lump sum shift, however.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So well, interestingly, maybe the minutes that we have to approve give some insight into that. Anyways, anything more?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Thanks. And next we have John McQueen.
Hey, hi. To somewhat of John's point and also Andrew's regarding the hopeful anticipated infrastructure plan, we can maybe look back toward the Great Recessions plan, and it really was based on shovel ready. And I guess I could encourage any of the municipalities or people hoping to get on the tip earlier or whatever to move into a shovel ready situation, assuming that there would be more funds available, and including perhaps having some of those funds for phase 2 of GLX, which I would assume has been shovel ready for a couple of years.
Yeah, it just especially for the small municipalities, so it takes money to get to shovel ready.
Well,
so
there probably are some that are closer than others. I mean, it's not going to be a broad sweep or a broad brush, but it's going to, as it did, was it 12 years ago, the ones who were in position were the ones who were able to leapfrog and collect the money and get things done.
Right. Well, I think maybe one of the things to me that we might contemplate when we try to determine how to move forward, what policies to change, is whether we support communities in getting their projects designed, which is part of getting them into the shovel-ready phase, and whether the MPO takes more of a role in not only selecting projects from the very beginning, but also supporting them through development and just more so taking ownership of them, so as to have a better means of handling the costs, so that we're not surprised by cost increases, and so it's like if we're going to commit to it, regardless of what had happened, then we might as well take complete ownership of it, so yeah.
Right, and probably an avenue where that could be implemented most directly, at least on a lot of projects, would be through the Complete Streets program, which does have an arm which will fund some of those studies and design drawings and things like that for the municipalities or feasibility. So they could perhaps use that as somewhat of a pump some money in there if they're close to shovel ready or confident of it. Anyway, that could be a source.
All right. Christina?
Okay, I just have another really quick point of view to kind of throw in here. I know being on the designing side, a lot of times when you go to the construction phase of a project, it's shovel ready becomes kind of, I don't know, but I'm not sure of the word I want to use, but it's not always easy because people in planning in other areas of the state or in traffic, they have events that are yearly and they have to consider that when they have any construction project coming up, like what is going to get shut down, where are you going to divert people, how are you going to get them to these? I mean, even something as simple as like graduation season is a big deal around here to try and get any project off the ground. So it may be shovel ready on paper, but going out into the real world and getting it done can be another issue, just so you know. That's it.
Well,
Another viewpoint.
Yeah, I hear you. I think maybe what people are saying is that we want the projects in a situation where they can go to the top of the queue. So regardless of when they are able to really start, they're at the top of the queue because people said, okay, well, you have everything you need in place to go, and as soon as it's physically possible for you to go, then we've given you the money, so you can just go when you can. But if you're not in a position where you can go to the top of the queue, then just no forward movement. That's a little circular, but I hope my point's somewhat clear.
No, I see what you're saying. I'm wondering if maybe Matt or someone at CTPS could kind of like loop in someone who does scheduling when it comes to actually getting a construction program off the ground. Like I said, somebody in planning. I mean, for graduation season, we have a lot of sporting events. We have a basketball season, a hockey season, a baseball season. I once got stuck in town and had a baseball and a Celtics game on the same night, and I spent 6 hours trying to get out of the city.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a lot to consider. You can't just,
Right.
I mean, I think who has the power to push something that is technically on paper shovel ready to push it to the front of the queue? Who does
Right.
that? Who has the power?
Well, we might ask John Machard that, because I had a question to him about just how can the MPO work more closely so that our projects that we choose really fit into the 3C model, which is comprehensive, continuous, and cooperative. And so he's a smart guy, and that's I think it'll be worth having him talk with us, and I think he'll be happy to talk with us. To schedule some time with him. So I'm going to have John McQueen next, and then Fred Mosley.
Yeah, back on the shovel ready, probably wouldn't hurt to have someone who was part of the recession's recovery with the original shovel ready program, kind of walk through what some of the steps were that worked in terms of helping municipalities or regional areas get things shovel ready and actually in construction and overcoming some of the obstacles of graduation or things like that, so that they could take advantage of these. Maybe we used to say they were once in a lifetime, but maybe second in a lifetime opportunities of big chunks of money coming from the Fed.
All right. Yeah, and John Machard might be able to help with that. I'm not sure how long he's been around, but he certainly has experience.
David Moeller might also.
Yeah. I was just thinking I could get John Bouchard to meet with us. Probably can't get David Moeller, so that's why I was thinking him.
Or maybe Tom DiPaolo.
I don't know who that is, but you do. We can touch base on that.
Well, he's I think deputy planning director or something for operations. I mean, he's pretty well up there. He's on the MABPAB and a bunch of other committees, but he's been in for maybe 30 years.
Yeah. Well, if that's someone you think we should invite, I don't have to be the one that chooses who we invite. If you advocate for that,
I'm just saying if that became a topic, the shovel ready, I think it would be worth a deep dive, perhaps for helping communities for CTPS to get that kind of historical
right
background on how to do it.
Yeah, well, it's timely. I mean, so
Yeah.
I'm advancing the conversation because I think it is something that we should try to program sooner rather than later. So maybe in our May, June, or July meeting. So we'll follow up on this, I mean, and try to find out who best, whether that's one or two people, to have talk with us about it. You know, thank you, Fred.
Oh, wrong button. No, a couple things. I think Tom, to the last point there, Tom or John Bashar would be good resources. I know John's been both on the consultant side and the MassDOT side, so he would bring a very good perspective to the discussion. As far as issues like graduations and things like that, that's all part of the design development process. So when a project is shovel ready and goes out, the contractors that bid on the projects know when they can and can't work. So that's usually worked out by the time the project's advertised, and it's just a constraint the contractor has to figure into his work operations. You know, if we tell a project in Hopkinton that they cannot do work on Patriots Day for the couple of days before and a couple of days afterwards, they know it going in. It's part of the schedule. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention is I've been hearing, and I think it's even come from Jonathan Gulliver, that the new stimulus funding is actually going to be expanded from the previous program to allow some design activity, which was kind of a big constraint the last time during the era funding. You know, they were looking for projects that were 100% designed. And I think we're going to be able to have some flexibility to ID projects in preliminary design and push them through. So I think the timing window is going to be longer on this, so we'll have more flexibility.
That's great. That's really good. You know, yeah, excellent. And all right. Well, thank you, Fred. That's very much appreciated. Yeah. So, wow. And I have a hard time remembering the last time a trash report generated so much conversation. But then I haven't really given you a lot to go on anyway, so maybe that's all my fault. Yeah. Minutes.
Yes, indeed. There is a set to approve. Someone wants to make a motion. Sorry, Len, I don't mean to be doing your job.
No, that's fine. No, it's where's David Montgomery when we need him. You know, so you know, no, it's fine, Matt. You know, I mean, yeah, Matt, yeah. And so I see John McQueen's hand up.
I move that we approve the minutes of December 11, 2019.
And can we get a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. So with a motion to approve the minutes by John McQueen and to second by Anna Fregosa. We're not going to do a roll call. Okay, so we're just going to do a raise of the hands. All right. If you approve of these, please use the participant button to raise your hand. I can't raise my hand, but my hand's raised. You know, so we have 6, that's 7 with me. And I think it passes because probably anyone who's not raising their hand, you know, probably can't remember if they were here or not. Although that should be in the minutes, you know. So okay, that's so we have. I think we 7 to approve. Okay, so you can put your hands down. And anyone who doesn't approve, put your hands up. So, you know what? I'm beginning to think it would have just been easier to do the roll call. Probably do that next time with a small enough number of people. Okay, but no hands up. So we're gonna approve those minutes, you know, and yeah. So that's that for the minutes, you know. And anyone has old business, new business announcements? All right. So now we're gonna go back to the needs assessment and chapter 6 of that, and we have from the last meeting, you know, and this meeting we didn't get to do them last time because agenda is pretty tight, and it's 98 pages. And I know I keep talking about these, but every time I read these things, I'm just so impressed. And my feelings are, if we didn't have this document, we would ask for it and say it was very necessary. And we have it. It's just such a treasure trove. So that's why I keep pushing to read it. And so next month we'll do chapter 7. But actually, just a little bit, just before I hop into that, and yeah, I may have to work a little bit after we get started in the conversation to put a link in to a paper that I mentioned at the I guess it was 2 meetings ago. It was part of the, it was submitted by someone who was making a comment on the tip. And it's a paper by 4 authors, Mark Rathman, Kathy Lambert, Jonathan Levy, and Patrick Kenny. And the title of it is Mortality Implications of Increased Active Mobility for a Proposed Regional Transportation Emission Cap and Invest Program. And I read it. I'm really impressed by it. The authors are local, and they talk about transportation climate initiative, which Josh Ostroff, from T4Mass, talked with us about, and that will potentially bring in some monies. So it's a regional state. I think it's like 12 states. So I don't know if any of that money is going to come in to us. But probably it will definitely come into the state. But it's you learn a lot about the benefits of active mobility and the methodology. I think is very interesting, and they have some very interesting conclusions. So we're going to try and bring them in to talk with us. And if I can tonight, this afternoon I'll drop the link to it into the chat. But it's just more reading material. But I think you'll find it really compelling. But anyways, back to the needs assessment. Oh, I see John's hand up.
Yeah, back on that item of the climate and carbon emissions and such like that,
Yeah.
we might even, if you brought them in, you also might want to think of bringing in Mike Barrett, Senator Mike Barrett. He's been pretty much the point person on that whole issue for the last several years. And I know he would, well, assuming he wasn't supposed to be on call for a vote or something like that, he'd love to talk more about it. And he's an evangelist on that topic.
Well, that's a good idea. Do you know him? Do you have an association with him?
I'm a constituent. I know him when I see him at ribbon cuttings and stuff, and he knows me, but that's about it.
Well, then my point is,
yeah.
You could ask him.
Sure.
Great. No,
I mean, if we have a date, give me a date and sort of a thumbnail of a topic discussion, and
sure,
I'll approach him when you got it.
Sure. Then we can talk about that. We won't be violating OML by you, myself, and maybe Scott and Matt. Trying to map that out and before our next executive committee meeting. So great. If anyone wants to start, talking about chapter 6, that's great. I would say if people think that they want to leave, and I won't be offended at all, it's just at some point we drop below quorum, and we should just then decide to dissolve the meeting before we drop below quorum. But I'm thinking that it's probably 15-20 minutes, and then if people really want to drop out, you can, and then those of us who want to keep talking, you just keep talking. And so I'll check back at 3, let's say 3:45 to see how people are feeling. Okay. And so John.
Yeah. Overall, I think the objectives and the goals of using the existing facilities and improving access and mitigating all the nasty stuff and improving the overall mobility options. That's all great. However, there's so many aspects of this within, whether it's land use, behaviors within land use, patterns of people leaving to go farther west, for instance, to Clinton or Hudson or places like that because they don't need to be downtown, remote working, and who knows what that's going to evolve into. But it seems from what we're hearing that a number of companies are looking to shave office space and possibly going to a partial remote, at least my son's company in Charlestown, which is a pretty good size one, EF Education. They're planning to come back to some degree in September, but they're probably going to be having a remote component. They haven't formalized that, but there's so many people that want it that it's going to happen. So that's going to change an awful lot in terms of vehicle patterns from what they're talking about. Transit, making it better, more reliable, and having the onboard situations more healthy and safe. Those are great, but how much is ridership going to rebound? So how do you work with that in terms of really implementing an overhaul of the transit to make it more mobile? The only thing that really stuck out to me in this that has legs we're already on a high trajectory, positive trajectory that will probably continue and expand on it are the bicycle and pedestrian, both in urban and suburban and even rural areas. That is going. So, working on those assets is important. And I think there was an item that came up in terms of a sidewalk inventory. I think we should probably supplement that with a sidewalk and a MUP, or bicycle path combined lane inventory and usage study, so that we've got our hands around that. But in terms of taking this as I think was said for planning, you take this information and you look to moving it forward into real action. A lot of the things for transit and vehicles are really, there are too many unanswered questions right now to take it into hard things. I think in a lot of cases beyond that because of COVID.
I hear you. Yeah, and so to a large extent, the needs assessment has been perturbed, by COVID, and so part of me now has gone from a shift of of evaluating all the needs assessments for how correct they are with respect to the near intermediate future. Is this the same approach that we want to take towards doing the next needs assessment, and what is it in the needs assessment that still applies? As you pointed out, I think a lot of the pedestrian stuff still applies. A lot of the biking stuff still applies, and maybe it applies even more.
Right.
But one thing I want to say is if, especially for those who haven't read it, if you do read it, there are sections below each mode where they get input from the public, both what the public thinks we need to do and then solutions. And I think those are really good. They're really interesting. There's a lot of them, but it's a fast read. It's good to see some ideas that people have and some ideas that they have for solutions. And I intend to read those a few more times and try to consolidate them into something that we can either propose as studies for next cycle, and certainly as priorities for the next LRTP. So Andy?
So I think on a similar vein, I think one of the things that at least in Cambridge has been really helpful for us, and maybe this gets at some of the other things that maybe haven't been talked about, is just our Envision Cambridge kind of citywide planning process when he focused on mobility issues. One of the key things that I think we heard and we've kind of memorialized in how we report out on our Envision Cambridge plan is how many options people have essentially within their neighborhood, or even down to like corners of the neighborhood, right? Like we're talking about quarter mile from a blue bike station. I believe Boston has a similar kind of desire to have blue bike stations no more than 10 minutes from all residents. And I think part of the mode shift conversation, where we are getting very elegant into thinking about like, what are these conditions that really allow people to live a life with lots of options and not necessarily choosing the car because it's the only viable, safe option in their neighborhood, right? So it would be nice to see, within the region, how common is of an experience that is, right? As we think about our needs. And, this is more in the background type of conversation is, right? Like these things about, having access to safe cycling facilities, the sidewalks, transit as a lifeline. Does it even exist? But then also, where is frequent transit located on another level? Those are just the things that come off the top of my head. And in terms of, how does the plan then relate to those kind of needs of, letting people have more options, and are these being done in ways that really helps us move the region to just giving people more choices. I think the other thing that I was thinking when I was going through it was, I know that there's parts about TNC, ride hail, and new mobility. I do think that that's probably a conversation that does need to continue. And it's one of those things that even in the city, we've kind of come to the realization that in looking at the new mobility kind of questions, we are realizing the limits of our understanding of equity and inclusion in our public processes. So the other piece that I think is just needing to be very clear is maybe the LRTP also does need to do a little bit of this baseline activity, is how is the transportation system different for different communities or different demographic groups, before even just elucidating, what is our plan, right? So those are three of the topics that came into my head as I was reading through the document.
Nice. And you got to push for your study that you want in UPWP. Also, I think Betsy Harvey said you got to go to this meeting. So that's good. That's good. So John, is your hand?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, sure.
To your point on the comments, I'm going to reread those too, but I think when this whole study this whole point of view and documentation and the questions were asked, none of these people had any sense of what the situation was going to be like that they were going to be confronted with in terms of not just limitations because of COVID, but the opportunities. I mean, who would have thought that they would be able to work at home in many cases for some segments of the population? Okay, back to Andrew's point, the equity point. And they wouldn't have to travel to get into a downtown and get dressed up and things like that and back and forth each day. Or that they didn't have to be within, MBTA bus line radius of where they worked, that they could be out in Framingham or Clinton or Sterling, places like that. There are just so many things that when the questions were asked, they didn't have a clue that they were going to be confronted with this, and there have been solutions, including the shared streets, things like that came about. So there's a whole new, I guess, need to almost revisit with these people, same people, but maybe different questions or different slants to them.
Yeah, well, that's interesting about me revisit, because that was one of the things that I mentioned when talking with Betsy about her studies, is that if you're going to interview people and get input from people in order to establish a baseline and then in order to determine whether you have made a difference, because chances are you're not going to get the same people. It becomes a longitudinal study without the control of the same people. So that means that the number of people you have to sample has to be higher. I think, well, I know it has to be higher. It's just a matter of how much higher it has to be. So it makes the study more difficult. I mean, I'm for difficult studies, but difficulty generally means added cost. And so we just have to be aware that I think it'll be a bit of a pricey study, but still worth doing. But the equity part is a big component. And they mentioned that too, especially with respect to bicycle, safe bicycling and trails and that they say that inner city it's just not as available in the inner city or in the inner core. That paper that I put the link to makes that comes to that same kind of conclusion. But once again, it puts such a it makes the case for active transportation being so beneficial with respect to health that you really everything you invest in it, even when you invest a lot, you get back just from the health benefits, the decreased mortality and the other benefits to health. And they're very conservative on that. And so I think it gives us even more motivation for funding more active transportation programs because of their benefit. And I think they tend to be lower in cost per project. And I think, but I'm not sure about this, that it's easier to control their costs. But even if under the present system, it's not easier to control their costs, then hopefully we will develop a system where we are in a better position to control costs, at least manage costs, so that we're not in a situation where we find ourselves with no money, So
also to your point, building on the health, it's not just the cardio health and leg strength. I think people realized during this that the access or the accessibility to sidewalks, to paths, afforded them a lifeline for mental health and positive attitude to get through this whole scary, limiting, isolated situation. And I think they realized that this is pretty good. People used to kind of compartmentalize bike paths and things like that as recreational. Well, recreation isn't all bad, really, in terms of the mental health and viability of it, but it got people from place to place, but also gave them positive minds. So we learned that. And I think a lot of people learned that that's something they're not going to give up either.
Yeah, I agree, and I hope we can quantify that because I like walking not just for the exercise of it,
right?
But I either relax and just clear my mind and think of nothing, or a lot of times I find myself just generating ideas. So it really kind of sparks creativity. But I'm just a sample of one. And so I don't know to what extent that applies to other people, but if we could really study that and then get across to people that this kind of active transportation. It just has so many more benefits. And now, as a society, we really need to make it possible for more people in every segment of society to be able to do it and still do other things. We're gonna have to have highways, and roads, because we got to get our products in, that we consume, and so it's not to the detriment of others or to the exclusion of others, but just raise the priority of it. Andy?
So maybe changing the topic a little bit. I hope that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. I'm gonna check in with everybody in about 3 minutes and probably I'll close down the meeting because then I think the rest of us can talk without violating OML. Go ahead.
No, so I think the other thing that I was just thinking about is, I think the chapter 6 is capacity management. And one of the things that when it comes to regional travel, which is important, but I feel like since the Destination 2040 was created, we've kind of shifted a little bit in the state is the question of speed. And I feel like the LRTP, in terms of its need assessment, focuses quite a bit on speed rather than travel time. And I think the travel time piece is actually the more instructive part, at least from a municipal perspective. I'm worried that if we measure congestion with decreases in speed, that's actually kind of a not the best metric, right? Like I'm hoping that during our peak hours, even, you know, as we kind of recover from COVID, it should be reasonable to expect that you're not going to travel at free flow speeds during rush hour, whenever that may be, right? Like I feel like there is something to the fact that there's just so much demand for travel. We shouldn't be measuring that, you know, the speeds have decreased so much that it becomes a level of concern. So maybe adjusting that, that's one thing. But then also too, a lot of municipalities have adopted, with the state government, the DOT changing some of the regulations on local streets, being able to adopt 20-mile-an-hour speed limits.
Plenty is plenty.
Cambridge went a little bit wild, and we basically went and like highlighted every single side street in our city and the major squares for 20 miles an hour. And I don't believe every municipality is following that tactic, but I do believe many of them are thinking very intensely about their built up in neighborhoods, right? Like, so maybe the local neighborhood business district or stuff like that. And I don't think speed in those areas is the right metric to evaluate, right, what the needs are out there. So I think that there needs to be a reflection of the change in thinking statewide and also in the municipalities in the MPO region, that, you know, we are thinking very strongly and intentionally about what speed limits are we designing for on our streets. And so if we look at things on a regional level and it's speed, and a little bit of travel time, maybe flipping it to, you know, travel time first, and then speed is the secondary concern.
Gotcha. So Matt, you know, Mr. Archer, can you drop this screen that we're looking at? Because just one more thing on the agenda, and so that, you know, we have more of the Brady Bunch box or not.
I can absolutely drop it.
Okay, great. And so it's 3:50, and I want to phrase this in a way that allows people to feel comfortable saying they want to go, because I just in a situation where we can't have more than a quorum and not violate OML. But I don't want to. I mean, I want people to feel free to go. So I want to shut down the meeting while we still have a quorum. And so let me just say this: I think we'll wind things up at 4 o'clock, at the very latest. And so I need some help here, Matt. Hey, how should I handle this? Should I go ahead and ask people if they want to stay, or should I just assume that people are going to stay until 4?
I think that we could just ask people if they need to go or if they want to stay. But if I could actually say one thing quickly, just to have it on the record while we still do have a quorum. We are coming ever closer to the TIP public review draft being released. Not immediate, but relatively soon. And as a result, we're going to need to have a 3C Documents Committee meeting following its release. So I just wanted that on the record. We can talk about, the committee can talk about that, about best dates. Chris unfortunately already had to leave.
Right.
And I tried to speak up earlier, but my microphone wasn't working. So I'm sorry about that. But the next MPO
April
meeting.
27th is the release.
Yes. So the next RTAC meeting is going to be on May 12th. So in theory, we could have it on May 11th, but Chris, as the chair, he ultimately would make the call.
Yeah, and I think probably it'd be better to aim for that first week, and if we fail for some reason, then we can fall back to that second week. And so let's have that conversation with Chris, but to kind of embrace the folks who are on the 3C committee, and anyone can really come to a 3C committee meeting. And so all of you who are listening who want to participate, let's prepare for that to be during the first week of May, and hopefully on Tuesday, because I have lab meetings on Wednesday. That's one going on now, and my job is nice enough they understand that I had this long running commitment before I became a part of the lab, but I'd like to just miss one lab meeting a month if at all possible. So there we are. Well, thank you for that, Matt.
Absolutely.
John.
Yeah. To Andrew's point, I think the measure maybe is better to be throughput, reliable throughput. as opposed to the speed. I think a good example is Nonantum Road, where the redo on that took away, I mean, it was a speedway before, it was totally unsafe. And people would be passing me going 70, 75 miles an hour, but then it would bottleneck and there would be a lot of accidents and things, but it was uneven in terms of who had the privilege. And that was when it was a 4-lane road. It took away a lane for each way, and it reliably goes 40 miles an hour and without a lot of hiccups and without people weaving in and out and causing trouble. But it seemed counterintuitive, but the throughput was really the objective there, and safety. And I think throughput could also happen once the I-90 is straightened out and things like that. If they were able to reduce the lanes, you'd still have, because you don't have to pay tolls, you'd still be able to get more cars, or the same amount of cars that they say they need through there, and it wouldn't be a speedway. It would be a reduced, controlled speeds because of just the limitations of space, but there wouldn't be the stops and starts. So, that's the throughput might be more of an objective for that.
And so thank you, John. So Andy, you can feel free at any point to say, hey, you dropped out, Len. I'm just not hearing you. Do you think there is any way we could extend the bus lane, from Arlington into Cambridge to Porter Square? Yeah. So because I think if I could say Cambridge is going to take this bus lane from the line to Porter Square, I could push really hard to get us to take it further back into Arlington, like to Arlington Center, because right now it starts at like halfway between Lake Street and Route 16. Like it's only like 4 blocks. But I'd like to get us take it back to Arlington Center. If we could get it like from Arlington Center to Porter Square, that would just be spectacular.
I don't know how you know what we're talking about in our other meetings in the city. That is a long-standing desire. To be totally frank, we have had our transportation kind of work plan upended by a council ordinance that was passed in the past year, where we actually have had to shift our resources to building separated cycling facilities. And so we've actually been retooling a lot of our transportation work to be able to do that. To give you a sense of what we need to do in the next 5 years, we need to basically build 25 miles of streets with separated cycling facilities. And we've not had that trajectory ever in the city of Cambridge. So it's quite the task. Nonetheless, it is an important priority to the city, and I am trying to find opportunities to actually do that nonetheless as a transit planner. So yeah, we want to, and the need has been clearly stated. Unfortunately, it's more the resources and the time, and also a little bit of the public process as well to be able to do that. But to get into specifics, we're looking at Porter Square in the next year, and we are trying to find opportunities to do bus priority in Porter Square, not all the way back through North Mass Ave, but as we look at Porter Square, that might actually become a reality.
That's good, because as you know, I mean, at least in Arlington, we share the bus lane with the bikes, so that kind of helps me, at least during the busy period. But I certainly understand the priority for the separated bike lanes. I mean, hopefully it'll help keep down or prevent bike cyclist mortality. So yeah, I hear that. And I'll trade that for more time, because no one's getting killed waiting. Because their bus line's taking longer, or their bus ride's taking longer. But people are getting killed on the streets. When they collide into a truck or a car or something. All right. Well, Well, thanks, folks, for hanging in, and for reading and for listening to those who have read, chapter 7. Next month. I think there are only three more chapters. So, but I think they're all relatively short. So we're just gonna do one at a time, and then I'll be able to say in an MPO meeting, the advisory council's read all of the needs assessment, and they'll just think that we're even weirder than they initially thought we were. Anyways, so can I get a motion to adjourn from John? Second.
So moved.
From Anna, Christina. As they do at the MPO meeting, they just adjourn unless someone really doesn't want to stop. So thanks, everybody. I'll see you next month, and take care.